It's often said about any sport, but particularly about esports, it's quite a common trend that people say, oh, it's all about the fans. The fans are the reason we're here. They're everything that's good about the game. Love my fans. Love even people who cheer against me. Love that there's fans out there. They're the ones who watch the game, everything. And so as a result, fan in our culture, even in sports culture, is actually taken to be, not that big a term. It's nothing unusual about it. No one would have any problem describing themselves as a fan. But actually, going beyond that whole semantic, etymological explanation that fan has its basis in the word fanatic, which goes into people who are like quite extreme, almost zealots in the extremity of their belief and thoughts about a certain topic and how they will even persecute other groups. So ignoring all of that ground has already been trodden many times over. And obviously in sports, you see it in when you try and describe fan culture, like hooliganism in football. Certainly in Europe, there's aspects of racism that have always been problems with in certain sports, and these are horrible manifestations of kind of the negative psychic build-up of certain fan bases and how they think of the game and how it interacts with their life. But just as a term, fan, there's quite a key reason as to why, in general, I always show a large amount of hesitancy to ever describe myself as a fan of a player, of a team, of even an esport to a degree. Now, sometimes I'll do it, particularly if it's like time constraints, like I'm talking to someone and I have to quickly get a point across, because for the sake of simplicity, or to not have to launch into the kind of like lengthy spiel that I'm going to go into now, essentially, it's just a very quick thing where at least they understand that, right, he likes this team, or he thinks this team's interesting, or that's the team he follows. On that very basic level, okay, I don't mind sometimes using it, but if I ever have an opportunity, I always make this clear distinction. I say I'm not a fan of any player or team, or even a game, but I do like certain players and teams, and I follow certain players and teams, and as a result I can explain why that is, and I can give reasoning behind it, but it will be different from fans. And part of the reason, if they were to tell you why they're a fan of this, or that they are a fan of this, and how they will behave, and I think there's a key distinction to make, because as I unpack a lot of this in this video, I'm going to basically dissect a lot of fan culture that I see negative aspects to. It's only perceived at the moment as a good thing that you love this team, and you follow this team, and you have the jersey of this team, and you pay for this team, and you watch this team. All these aspects that seem like the positives, people are ignoring the negative side as though it has to come with that, which I'm not sure it does, and I'm not sure that it is necessarily the best way to live and that you have to think that way. Now, that's obviously my opinion. I'm not making anyone else do anything. It's not a totalitarian society where I force people to do stuff. I'm giving my opinion on this topic. So one of the reasons why I don't describe myself as a fan is not that I don't like certain teams, etc., which you might think is the basis of it, but in modern parlance, if you look at how people think of themselves as fans and what they then do and the behaviours under the umbrella of being a fan, it's something very different now. It's like the whole thing of the fact that, in general, a lot of what I see as feminist discussion, a lot of it to me is not very rational and doesn't come down to the idea of like getting more rights for women or expanding their horizons and giving them more opportunity. It doesn't come down to that. A lot of it then which is, some of those are positive qualities, good things to achieve and goals still set, and interesting things to try and make awareness about in our society. That's all a nice basis, you'd think is the basis of the feminist. We obviously know, if you've looked on the internet or read any fucking articles or seen any activism in the last 10 years, you'll see these negative, almost toxic aspects of femininity or feminism, or the way it's applied and the way they attack other groups and the way they even engage in the same behaviours they themselves claim to hate and be persecuted and oppressed by, but you see it going out there and them doing the same thing in their name of their ideology. And that's the whole thing. In general, I don't like ideologies. I don't buy into any one ideology. I think as soon as you do that, you see this kind of a corruption that takes over yourself, because buying into an ideology isn't just to say that makes sense to me. It's then to say sort of like, right, I give up my logical, rational thinking, and I'll take on board all of this ideology. I'll take it wholesale. And so even these aspects that don't make sense or are just arbitrary or even have a capricious nature to them, I'll accept them as well, just because for some reason I have to accept it all to be part of this group. I mean, that's what part of being a fan is about, is trying to be part of the group and knowing the rules. So one of the reasons why I don't engage in that, in calling myself a fan, is because I not only don't want to engage with some of these specific sets of behaviours that I'll describe, which at the moment, unfortunately, at least it's what people think, seem to be intrinsically linked to being fans and fan thinking, as I'll describe it, but I actively, despise, deride, and in some senses oppose many of these behaviours. So, as a result, like I say, I typically say I like a player, or they're my favourite to watch, or I follow a player's career. Now let's talk about some of these behaviours. So we'll start with this behavior. Delusional thinking about the personnel within a team. So basically the players within a team or a specific player. So you can see this manifest where when someone really loves a team, somehow that then means he has to love all the players in this team. This very often happens. This isn't a rare thing. This is the general rule. They either love all of them or to a degree they like all of them in a sense. And not only that, they then have to think that these players are good in a sense, all of them in some sense. And then they have to, unfortunately, it then goes to extremes where some of these players are now beyond criticism. You're not allowed to criticize people to the extent that people react as though you were criticizing their family member. When you're not, you're criticizing a player, a professional player in an area where we're all supposed to watch, we're all allowed to have opinions about these things, and our opinion, it's not like our opinion makes something happen, but they attack you as though you sort of like were talking to their dad's boss, like, yeah, you should fire that guy, he's fucking shit. That's almost the way they'll respond to you, with the vitriol and hatred. So delusional thinking where everyone's great, everyone's good, because I like this team, I have to like this player, I have to like this thing. And it becomes this very emotional, vitriolic reaction to how you think logically and just expressing an opinion about the quality of a player's play and whether he should be in this team, whether he shouldn't be in this team. I mean, I'll give you some examples, because the area I notice this nearly always comes up in is when you're talking about whether a player should be removed, whether a player is playing good enough right now to warrant being in this team, whether they could upgrade this player, whether they should get rid of him because he has negative qualities that will be a problem in the future going on in the team. People will then start to think, because again they're liking the team, they're liking the players, they're liking the personality as well as the in-game play and the play of one player or an aspect of the team in the past that attracted them, because it's this whole part and parcel they think they have to swallow. It'll then get to the point where you can't have these discussions over these players. So for example, within Titan's one of the teams I've always liked, I've always followed, mainly because they have specific players, by the way. If some of these players left and the quality of their team went downhill and they had a different style, they didn't even have some of the players I enjoy, I actually wouldn't follow them anymore, I wouldn't like them particularly. So again, you can see it's a different connection there. But Titan, yes, they had this very fluid style. They had a style that was very coherent, this tactical style. I'm talking about the like early 2015 Titan here. And you knew where the frags were going to come from, the roles were very well defined, and the overall approach was set there. Yet you couldn't have discussion early on. We're talking about early on, before like March onwards or so, where Maniac did start to get his level up quite a lot relative to a support position. You weren't allowed to criticise that Maniac should potentially be removed, or he's the person that I'd replace, or he doesn't do enough here, whereas here's what the team needs overall. You weren't allowed to have these discussions. If you did so, it was presented as though you hate him, like you don't like him on a personal level, you're disrespectful to him. All these terms have no place in assessing a player's quality, his performance level, whether you can upgrade that position, and business sense of like, should they upgrade this position, will it give them more chance at success? Really, all these terms are like deserve, disrespectful, these shouldn't even really be being used here. This shows kind of an emotional reaction rather than the logical component. Likewise, in League of Legends, one of the teams I used to follow was Blaze. Now, the main reason I followed Blaze is because of certain players they had that I used to find very appealing to watch. So one of them in the past was Reapered, his brilliant top laner, and then after that, another brilliant top laner came up, was a guy called Flame. These were two of my favourite players to watch. A fantastic style, very high quality level players, very set in how they want to play, but unique in their playing style and strengths. And so as a result, I would follow the team because that's where they play, obviously. Now, what's funny is another player within Blaze, probably the third player I was interested in, who overlapped both of these guys' career, was their mid laner Ambition. And he was always the second star of these two teams, or vying to be the top star. Now, what's funny is Ambition himself is someone who I was one of the first people, even when they were always a top 4, top 8 team in the country, to say they should probably look at removing this guy. Like, he's a problem. He's only good enough in sort of like 2 out of the 3 games. In fact, probably 2 out of 3 games against the top teams, against when he's playing against players at his position who for 3 out of the 3 games are going to have a good enough performance that will beat him overall. So he's going to be one of the key problems going forwards, because you need him to be a star level player and he's not quite there at his position. So even though early on in the Reaper era, he was one of my favourites as well. And I thought, what a great, reliable player, can play every sort of matchup, really consistent style, always adapts his champion pool to be in the meta. But later on, I was immediately someone who was like, okay, we need to divorce the fact that we liked the things about him in the past and we maybe like some things about his style now. Realistically, compared to the resources this team has, other players, money, infrastructure, potential for the future, is this guy fitting the position here? Should we try with a different, lesser player? Should we try with another star player? I had no problem ever doing that. Likewise, even though I very much enjoyed the team, and in fact the early 2013 team they had is one of my favourite teams of all time in League of Legends to watch, because this, again, a bit like Titan, this very unique but strict style, the sixth man style, waiting late in the game, farming the two main people up, giving up dragons to put the gold onto those two main carries, then having them carry the whole game, everyone else plays safe, tries to 1-3-1, then meet for the team fight. It's such a brilliant, incredible style to watch, and if it was well executed, it was so beautiful as in terms of League of Legends, and such a unique approach. But to the players who were involved with that style and that early team, Helios, Captain Jack, again, these were players where even as I was like, this is one of my favourite teams to watch, I really enjoy them, etc., I would always be like, I can see massive flaws in how they play. They probably should be considered, like, people should be looking for upgrades here. At this point, they're costing you certain wins in the game. I didn't have this delusional sense that, like, because I like this player and then I like this team and I like this style, then everything must be accepted and everything must be the best. And if you don't like it, that must mean you have something personal against them. No, it was never there. There's also the aspect that, this will sound strange, but fans, bearing in mind what I've just said there, where they won't let you sort of even discuss upgrading certain players, which would allow them to be more successful in many cases, and remove negative qualities that are going to be anchors, or when you've got a band-aid player who can only be used for a short while and be decent. It'll sound contrary, but at the same time, fans care way too much about winning. Winning becomes something, because they've attached their identity to this player and this team in this particular time, and the time they're carving out of their life to watch them, and maybe some of the other problems they have in their life that they don't address, but in this world they can kind of like say, oh, this should happen, or I want this, and they're pulling so hard in this area. They care way too much about winning, because somehow their identity comes up with like, oh, we won and I was involved in it somehow, it feels good for me as well. And so as a result, I often define it, like, because I've given this example many times in different pieces of media that I've done, I would rather see a player that I like or follow lose what was a brilliant game, amazing play from really high level from both players, entertaining, back and forth, high level, strategy, skills shown off. I'd rather see this player lose that game than the same player win a game, even if it was for a world championship that wasn't a particularly entertaining game, or was just an okay game, or just they played all right and then the enemy made all these key mistakes that just threw the whole game, and then they win in that fashion. And to me, I would choose the former over the latter. Now, you might think to yourself, well, that'd be reasonable. No. The majority of fans would choose the latter. All that matters to them ultimately is that they win. Because again, they're making their identity into it. It's like, oh, we won. We're one of the greatest. Or who cares about what the game was like? All that matters is that we won. Well, the great thing is, in history, I can tell you an exact example of when this happened to show the fact that it's not just a theory that I have. I've seen it happen in practice. So one of the players in the latter era of the NBA that I often followed and was one of my favourites was Kobe Bryant, the shooting guard of the LA Lakers. Now, in 2010, his team was going to their third NBA Finals, and they'd lost the one in 2008, and they'd won the one in 2009. But in 2008, they'd lost to the Boston Celtics, and then in 2009, a different team had gotten to the final because the Celtics had an injury, and the Lakers had won there. So in 2010, the Celtics make it back there. It's the rematch between the two teams, and they're playing the team that they lost to 2 seasons earlier. So every Lakers fan, it's really important that the Lakers win this series, and that they kind of get redemption or some revenge, or that they don't lose twice there and have the stigma of like they were always better than us, and hey, maybe they even would have won in 2009 if they made it there. So all this emotional and kind of psychic drama was built into this one basketball series, a best of 7, and the best of 7 went the whole way. The Lakers were down 3-2, or 2-3, and they won game 6, and they got it to game 7, which was on their floor, the Staples Center, home court advantage. So they're favoured to win. This is where they have to win. And so in this game, the player that I was following, who's my favourite at the time, Kobe Bryant, has one of the worst performances of his whole career. I think he went something like, I think it was like 6 for 24 or 7 for 24. It was somewhere in that range, like absolutely terrible. And what's worse is you could tell from the way he was playing, not only was his shot not working at all, and his game wasn't rolling in any sense. I mean, he did some rebounding, but that's not his game in general. But you could tell he was forcing it as well. Like, he was so desperate to win, he wanted to so much that actually it was fucking up his own game, and it was fucking up his team's chances. But luckily, this game, which turned out to be terrible from both sides, there was maybe like one player, like Pau Gasol had a pretty decent game, but that's about, even then it wasn't one of his best, it was just good in the circumstances. Everyone on both sides has a fucking terrible game. It's a really, really low quality game for a playoff game in the NBA. But the Lakers win this shitty, low scoring, terrible game at the end with a little bit of dramatics because everyone's missing and the score's quite tight in the fourth. and they win this game and they win that championship and they beat the team who'd kind of been the monkey on their back before, and they get revenge and they win back-to-back titles, and they've all this great stuff, and the player that I like has succeeded and he's gotten another championship and he's pushed himself up in the world in the all-time rankings. You know what? I'd have rather they lost that game, but it had been an all-time great game. I'd rather that was a phenomenal, fucking amazing game and they'd lost it instead. I'd legitimately rather that had happened, even if it meant they wouldn't have won the championship and that game would have gone over the other one, and fans of the other team would always cite that game and bring it up and be like, we beat you at your best and all that stuff. I wouldn't care, because I'm not a fan. I follow these people and I like to watch them, and I like to watch high-level games of Counter-Strike or League of Legends or NBA or whatever. I'd rather that had happened. Similarly, I've seen matches in tennis, for example. Like many people, I've enjoyed watching the career of Federer. So there were some titles that he won earlier in his career where he played people who were like had one-off tournaments where they were super sick just for that tournament, but in their careers they still had a way to progress. So think of like Andy Murray when he played him in the US Open in, I think it was in 2008, he played him in the final there, and then the year before, 2007, he played Djokovic in the final, and this is just before. It's like a couple of years, actually it's like 4 or 5 years for both of them before they really hit their peak, when they really were like winning at a canter, winning multiple championships over and over. So the problem is they had great tournaments to get there, but in general it wasn't likely they were going to win, and they didn't. They were severely outclassed. Federer, yes, had some brilliant play, so actually it wasn't as bad as this Lakers example, but he won too easily. There wasn't really that much fight. The others couldn't really do that much. He was always going to win. He had them totally in the palm of his hand, do whatever the fuck he wanted, toying with them to a degree, and he won quite easily both times. I think he might have even won I think it was in straight sets in both finals. Meanwhile, some of his losses later in his career, when he was exiting his prime, in fact he was out of his prime, but he still had all the skills of his prime, and now other people are entering their prime, some of those matches are some of my favourite matches of all time, even though my favourite player is losing in heartbreaking fashion there, because these are fucking amazing matches. Like, he's playing some of his best tennis relative to where he is in his career then, and what skill set he has, and utterly amazing points, even in games he's losing, even in sets he's losing, but the matches are just incredible, and the other guy's pushing him to a high level, and then the other guy even exceeds him. So I'm thinking like of when, well, I mean, an obvious one's the 2008 Wimbledon final when Nadal won in 5 sets, and there was that amazing last set was absolutely unreal. And then there's the 2009 Australian Open final that he was in position to win for like 3 out of the 4 sets, but in the end he ends up only winning 1 set. And I don't know, this is the one where he went 5 sets, I think, actually. Fuck, why do I not remember that? I think that was the 5-set one. No, that was actually that. But he was in position to win so many times, had so many crazy, amazing shots, but Nadal was a warrior, got through to the end, won the set anyway. And then, let me think, what else could we... Oh, a great one, obviously, is the 2010... Let me think. Yeah, the 2010 semi-final of the US Open, where he played Djokovic, and Djokovic won in the 5th set after being down, I think it was down 1 set to 2? I think Federer was up 2-1 in set, and this was just an unreal game. It took some amazing shots by Djokovic to get back, and both players just play some god tier shit. So again, I can, like, as I'm saying, this isn't just a fanciful theory, like I'm trying to present like, oh, I'm above everyone else and I just like to see the best games played and I don't pull for one person. No, I can actually tell you that when I think of my favourite games, because I've managed to separate it in this sense, I actually get enjoyment even out of the losses of these players. Like I always say, you know what the best thing? The second, okay, if I put a hierarchy of what I like in a game, yes, there would be something to watching the best possible game with my favourite player winning. There we go. That would probably be the best, right? Second best, watching the best possible game with my favourite player losing. Now you might think, well, that's obvious. They're just best games. No. Remember, that's the second best possible thing. So the third best option of like very good game, but my favourite player wins, is after best possible game that my player loses. That's third on the list. And as we go down, like my player wins, the one I like, but terrible game is going to be super low down on the list. Now for most fans that's going to be very high up, and it's going to be above examples like best possible game my player loses. That's actually a very different mentality to most fans. Let's continue on. So let me think, how do I get back from sports to where I was there? Okay, I'll tell you something else that players do that I really fans do rather, that I really dislike. So, because they're a fan of this player, they take up another player or team who's at a similar level, or is a peer of his, or a rival of his or theirs, and is around a similar success level even, and in order to try and boost their own players' achievements or relative achievements to the other person, or make theirs not seem as bad if it's two teams aren't very good. They try to downplay the accomplishments of other players, other teams who are rivals or are peers, in order to try and make theirs look better. Now, I really dislike this because, again, I like to see great level play beyond who the person involved in it is. So in CSGO terms, a great example would be NIP fans who for the last 9 months to a year have been telling you that Fnatic are just shit, and if they win they're just cheaters, and they're not even good, and they don't win, they don't have the same class and same style, and never be as dominant as NIP, and all this stuff where they're never mentioning any of the good stuff that Fnatic's doing. They're not acknowledging any of the brilliant stuff that they're doing, and they're so blinded by their haterism that they have to, their number one goal, their agenda, is they have to downplay all of Fnatic now so that NIP's greatness, one of the greatest periods ever in the history of CSGO, where they were the greatest team ever for that period of time, definitely, they want to make that stand alone so that nothing else can even be close, because shitting on this so much that they don't even consider it and don't acknowledge anything great about it. Even the things that were great about the NIP area, some of them that transfer and translate to what has happened in the Fnatic area, they don't acknowledge any of that. They're so blinded by the fact it has to be NIP, not Fnatic, that they can't see any of that, and so they just spend their time shitting on them. In League of Legends terms, what's funny is the Fnatic fanbase themselves are guilty of this. So if you talk about the greatness of Moscow 5 and Gambit Gaming, you'll have Fnatic fans who, because they're the other team who are the rivals to be the greatest European team or franchise ever in League of Legends, they'll just shit on M5's legacy and be like, it was only in Season 2, and that wasn't LCS, so it wasn't proper League of Legends, and you know what, some of those tournaments were bullshit, and the meta hadn't developed properly, and it was too early on, and Koreans hadn't really gotten involved yet, so those don't count. Likewise, another set of Fnatic fans, obviously not Fnatic fans anymore to some sense, Xpeke fans, who they can't say, oh, Xpeke is brilliant, and I prefer him because I prefer aggressive assassin players who are playmakers and who have this ballsy counter-pick style. Instead, they'll say, Xpeke is brilliant, and you know what, Froggen, he's just shit, and he's terrible for these reasons, and he's a coward, and he plays like a pussy, and he just plays this easy style, it's not even good, and when he wins, it's kind of like, it's lame that the game even lets you win that way, and they can't acknowledge the greatness of both players. To acknowledge one, they have to shit on the other and bring him down. I mean, you see this in the NBA all the time. When LeBron became the best player, but Kobe Bryant was still one of the best, and in terms of greatness all time was above LeBron, they had to make it that in the game at the point he was better than LeBron. And because LeBron wasn't like some clutch player in terms of hitting like buzzer beaters, that was the one area they would go to and go, because he isn't that, he's actually shit. He's not even, it's not even that he's just the second best, he's just shit. He's a fucking coward, he's dog shit, and there's loads of people who are better than him. The way he plays isn't even the way you're meant to play the game, and he just, the refs just help him all the time. All this stuff where what's funny is, obviously, if you think of fucking refs helping someone, Kobe Bryant's got some of the most help of any refs in the history of the game. He's one of the people who learned how to abuse the fucking tic-tac touch fouls in the early 2000s era of the NBA as much as anyone. Him and Allen Iverson would go fucking ham with that shit. So what's funny is, you'd think if they can acknowledge that LeBron's doing that, they'd do the same for their player, but now they don't. They have to just be so skewed and delusional and put one up and bring the other down. Whereas actually, even if you thought one was better, so a preference case, like say you think Xpeke is better than Froggen, you at least obviously acknowledge Froggen's second or third best, right? Nah, some of them have to be like, in fact, he's not even top 5. I'd put like Nuke Duck or something, like whoever the fuck they'd put there, You see where this is not just negative behaviour, but it comes from a delusional way of thinking about the world. If I downplay a player or his legacy or the way people think about him, that's because on his merits of his skill set, what he accomplished, the context of what he did in his career, etc., I actually legitimately, divorcing what I like about a person or don't, think that way. So for example, I've got a video that'll come out soon where I actually talk about why I think in the context of history, when we're talking about all-time great players, I think people actually overrate Diamond Prox. Now, you might just think, I fucking hating on Diamond Prox. Diamond Prox is like one of my favourite players of all time. I've watched almost every game he's ever played. I've probably studied every interview he's ever done, looked at every A answer, watched tons of streams, read tons of like pro builds guides to see what he does. In fact, his pro builds page is like my fucking Bible for playing the jungle position. But I acknowledge, when I look at the context of it, that actually some of his merits are overplayed and people purposely ignore or kind of protect his weaknesses or blame them on others, and actually I think that's kind of fucked up, so that'll be mentioned in the future. But a fan of his. No, you can't do that. He has to be the best. In fact, some of them will describe how he's better than Dandy and better than Cacao. In fact, they'd say he's better than Dandy because they're like, but he innovated more and stuff. It's like, again, they always take it to like one little area and they don't look at the whole holistic aspect of it. They try to make it all about one tiny thing. It's like corrupt politicians where they have to make the debate about one tiny thing, not the overall thing of like who's doing the most good and what is the best policy here and is there a positive to his policy. No, you can't acknowledge any of that. None of that's worth anything. It's all about this one little thing. Because I have the edge in this area, I win, and this person wins, and they're all wrong, and they're the worst ever. It's ridiculous in that sense. In fact, that's another area that you see this kind of, these negative behaviours is in politics, where again, it's not that like, these are clearly the two best political parties. If you really thought that way, you'd think that they would, if they really believed in their political process as bullshit as democracy obviously is. But you'd think if they were like, I agree with these policies more, and I don't really like that. Instead, it's like, they're the devil, and if they get in, society will collapse and go to shit, and oh my God, it'll all be the worst ever. But if I was getting in, it'll be this utopia, this paradise, they'll fix things, and things will be done the right way. And you look, and sometimes the policies are like, this much fucking difference between me. Like, really, dude? What life are you living here? Why does it have to be so extreme, It would obviously be 1 and 2 in that scenario for you. 1A, 1B at sometimes. Especially in fucking American politics, where they're so central, it's fucking ridiculous. So, let me think, what's another one? Fans refuse to live in the present in any reasonable sense. So if they're the worst fans, are fans where they're fans of a team or player that was one of the greatest, if not the best, because years after the fact, they just refuse to acknowledge that this person isn't the best, or they constantly boost them way above the level of where they are. So a great example of this would be NIP fans in CSGO now. So fans will say stuff now like, well, obviously this player isn't better than them because NIP's made the final of all 5 majors. And you just think to yourself like, okay, so they made the final of some majors. Okay, so the most recent one, that's already 6 months ago, so that's not really that relevant to right now. But even if we count that one, okay, so there's one out of your 5 examples is worthwhile. The other 4 are having less and less relevancy. And in fact, 3 out of those 5 have almost no relevancy because we're talking about over a year ago with a different player against different teams, and the first ones out of those 5 have pretty much zero relevance whatsoever to right now who is better. The idea that, like, for example, Fnatic has to make like 5 major finals in a row to have been as good as NIP right now, not in all of history, right now, doesn't have any relevance. So again, just living in the past in a ridiculous fashion, and as a result refusing to ever give up on the idea that a player was as good as that. And so if a player slumps or a team slumps, to them, it can only ever be a slump. Like, it's very brief. They can never actually be a slump that goes into just being worse and bad, which happens in all careers of the greatest sportsmen, the greatest players. Sometimes they drop off. Sometimes they're done with their careers. Their peaks have ended. They're just not as good. Sometimes they become terrible. And that's just going to be now, to a degree, the permanent scenario. Not permanent in the sense that it might get worse, as in it can't get worse or better, but in the sense that where you are right now is going to, for the next few months, there's going to be a consistency to how bad they are now relative to how good they used to be. Instead, living in the stream world in that sense. Now, again, there's certain players where I don't agree with the consensus that they're slumped or they'll never be good again. So you might think, well, you're engaging in the same fan behaviour. No, that only happens when I've assessed the reasons as to why that is. And I've looked at the evidence. And at the moment, I think that's too extreme a conclusion to take from the evidence available. Or it doesn't quite make sense to me people's reasoning as to why that person's fallen off there. And I think maybe it's a teammate issue or a stylistic issue. And so a good example would be my favourite League of Legends player is a player called Flame, the top player now. He doesn't play for Blaze anymore. He now plays for a Chinese LPL team called LGD. And so when he joined LGD, he was made the backup top laner. He plays like maybe 1 out of 3, 1 out of 4 games. Acorn is the main player, and he's basically the sub for him, and he comes in 1 out of 3, 1 out of 4 games. Now, initially, over the first 2/3 of the split, he had quite a lot of issues the first time he was there. Okay, so you might think, the same thing, you're holding on to the past that he was a great player. No, the reason why I hadn't given up the notion that he could be, and one day would be a great player again, is because he wasn't playing as much, so he didn't have match fitness in the same way, and scrims aren't the same as matches in that sense. That's why a lot of great OGN players, some of them were on shit teams first, or some of them didn't quite develop for a year or so because they didn't get enough opportunity. They might be put in for a game and then taken straight out if they don't do very well. So there wasn't match fitness. He was playing a totally counter meta of champions, to the philosophy and style that had made him successful. So he has to totally learn something new. And if he's stuck on that, he might never be good again. But my philosophy was, if you'd have moved him onto these other ones, he'd have a chance to be good again with the carry style. He was playing a different style. He was playing a utility team first approach over that hard carry style where he gets the goal priority and everything's funneled through him and he has the jungle pressure and attention. So as a result, until I've resolved, is he going to stick with the style? Can you change back to the others and see the success there is? I'm not going to immediately jump on the outcome that, he's dog shit now. And as a result, this split, for people who don't like League of Legends, just to explain this split particularly, he had this run of like 10 or 12 games, where in like 70 or 80% of those games, he was playing much better than the guy he's the sub for, and he was one of the best junglers, top laners in China, and top 10 in the world for sure at that point in time, for that period. So as a result, in a way, I was in a sense vindicated. Not in the sense that I called that he was going to be that, but that it never quite fully made sense that he would be dropped off as much as the people said. And some of those factors turned out not to have a basis, actually, and that's why he had this very good period. Fans also tend to have really delusional expectations of how well their team can do right now and in the future. So right now, they'll say really just worthless comments like, well, if they all played to their best and this guy steps up, then they'll win the game and win the tournament. Now, on its basis, that's probably a worthless statement anyway. But first of all, why would they all play their best, but the other team's players not play their best? You're going to give me a reason as to why that happened. How often does that happen? How likely is it? It's not good enough to just be like, well, in 1 out of 100 cases, we'd win this scenario. Okay, then are they going to win? Yes, of course, I just said. Well, no, you just actually told me there's a 1% chance of that happening. So you're actually telling me it's not going to happen, and yet you believe it is. So you can see how this is delusional, almost a cognitive dissonance in how the world operates and even what you're actually saying underneath what you're saying if you were to be honest about it. So again, why would they all step up? Why would they play this way? Also, isn't that redundant? Couldn't you say that about every team, that if the last place player stepped up and was 3 times better inexplicably, then they'd win the match and do better? In many, many cases you could say this, but you wouldn't think that about the team that you don't support and you aren't a fan of. So it's actually kind of very delusional thinking. And if I were you, if you're trying to be intellectually honest and ordered in your thoughts, I'd be worried if you were engaging in that sort of behaviour. So there's also the factor that they will think, as a result, because they're only essentially looking at the best case scenario, or like when everything went perfectly, or when things went perfectly and an opponent made mistakes and they don't acknowledge that those are mistakes. It's always that. You see this as well. When they analyse a game, their team loses a game very narrowly, and they'll say to themselves, well, we would have won if this tiny little mistake hadn't happened, or that guy hadn't gotten lucky there. But then their team wins very narrowly, and the opponent makes a tiny mistake, and their player gets a bit lucky, and they don't acknowledge that as luck. That's not luck to them. That was supposed to happen. So you can see you get into very shaky, logical and rational regions of thought when you look at this behaviour. It doesn't really have a whole lot of connection to the mind or appreciating the game. It just becomes very much about, my team has to win, I want them to win, that's all that matters. That's where it becomes about with some of these fans. There's, as a result, people projecting where a team should finish. They will think stuff like that a team who realistically is like a 5th to 8th level team, logically a good place for them is probably a really good placing would be getting a top 4 finish. And even then you might need the right opponent, or you might need a bit of luck here, or a weird map veto process to get to the top 4. To them, but in general rule, they'll always think one stage ahead, I've noticed, of where their team is. So people whose team is a 5th to 8th team will always think, they should be top 4. And a team whose team is just top 4, they're 3rd or 4th best in the world, they'll be like, they'll win the whole tournament, they should be the best in the world. They always have this. They go too far with their expectations. Yet, I'll give you examples again of teams that I followed and that I liked and were some of my favourites. So Titan in CSGO, this one from this year, I knew that at their best, with the right matchup, getting someone like a Fnatic or an Envious, with the right maps, getting onto maps like Inferno, getting onto maps like Dust 2, maybe Cash, they had a chance. Even then they weren't a favourite to win those series, but they had a chance now maybe to get to a semi on a reasonably regular basis, not the last 3 months, the first sort of 4 to 5. And then if they got the right opponent, the right maps, now they could make a final, but they would lose the final. They weren't going to win big events. Any event with 3 out of the top 5 teams in the world, there's no way they were going to win those. And yet this was my favourite team, because to me that doesn't, the fact I like them and the reasons I like them don't then make me have to believe this ridiculous delusional scenario that they're going to do way better. Likewise, Blaze, the team with Flame that I described from League of Legends, in their prime, yes, they were a team who could have won and could have been the best in the world, because they very briefly were the best in the world. Admittedly, they didn't win the final of that tournament. Now, after that, some of their great other teams, the Neo Blaze lineups with Daydream and Emperor, in these eras, no, they weren't going to win OGN. That was never going to happen. The great teams of all these eras, SK Telecom, Samsung Blue, Samsung White, were always going to have beaten them in a series. But they could always play these teams close, except SK Telecom, actually. That's the one they couldn't particularly have played close. But teams like KT Bullets, they always played very closely. The Samsung teams, they always were able to go back and forth with to a degree. These sorts of teams, they could match up with, and they could battle with, and they were probably going to just lose. And so as a result, for this team, reasonably, at certain times, they could have made a final. Like, for example, they were one game away from making the final in OGN Spring 2014, where they lost the blind pick to, who was it? Shield. There we go. And other times, top four was a more reasonable one. Sometimes they didn't finish top four, because, twice they had to play KT Bullets in the round of 8, when KT Bullets was the second best team. So there we go. That might have been a top four right there. But again, this is reasonable expectations. It's not wish fulfillment. It's not dreaming up, and if this player does 10 like, I didn't just say, but if Emperor just plays like the best AD carry in Korea, then they'll win. Well, that's not going to happen. He's not the best AD carry. He's like probably the 4th or 5th best AD carry, and as a result, I expect a 4th performance. Likewise, Ambition. I know in 2 games out of 5, Ambition can be good and can even outduel some of these other good mid laners. He's not going to be the best mid laner in Korea. He's not going to win 3 or 4 out of the games of the 5 for you. And so you have to expect reasonable expectations, and as a result, not have this emotional reaction to the game that I don't have in that sense. You also see negative fan behaviour in the way that they send abuse to other players or other fans of these players. Now, there's something I want to address here, which is this myth that the world is made up of 2 types of people in terms of fan base. There's fans, people who love these players, and they just love what they're all about is just appreciating that player and loving him, and it's a very positive affair, and they just follow this guy and they really love it. And then there's this other group, haters, and they are just these horrible toxic people who just hate, and all they do is express their hatred and be mean to people and all the rest of it. My experiences after studying fan bases and watching especially fans in esports over 15 years, more than that actually, because that's just how long I've worked in the scene, so probably like 18 years, is that there aren't 2 groups like that. There's one group, and they're called fans. Because do you know what a hater is? A hater is a fan of someone else. So this ties back into the point I made before, where so many fans, because they're such zealots in how they think of their team, and they build all these delusions in, they then they feel as a compulsion, almost a way of identifying themselves with that group. To identify themselves as this, they have to identify themselves as not this over here, or not that, if you're listening to the audio version. To be this, I have to be not that. That's part of the identifying. And so to do so, they have to put that down and hate on it and shit on it and be really scrutinise it ridiculously and go the other way. Instead of having delusions and over unrealistic expectations about their team, they have to have ridiculous ways of downplaying that one and go way beyond the pale on it. And so as a result, that guy, if you took him in the context of his team and player, he would seem like he's the fan. He is the fan. But take him for the other team, and this isn't everyone obviously, but these are trends you see. He's the hater when you put him in the context of the rival, of the other team, of the team that beats yours, or the team that you always beat. This is where he becomes the horrible person, the hater. That's all he is. Again, I don't engage in either of these behaviours. I don't love them in that sense, unrealistically, and I don't hate people in this particular manner either. And so as a result, you don't see me engaging in the behaviour that fans behave in. Now, people again are going to be like, this is such a small fraction of fans. Part of my job, okay, is to read Reddit, to get the pulse of the community, see what people's general consensus is, so I know how to phrase my articles, so I know who I'm talking to, what I'm writing to, what they think of something, so I can address that and articulate myself better. And, well, in the past, admittedly, not so much now, was to like read Reddit and get people's responses and interact with people, etc. So as a result, I see a lot more fan comments and behaviour than the most fans do, because I get thousands of tweets and Reddit replies and all that stuff every week. Let me think, is that reasonable? I think that's probably right actually when talking about Twitter. So I'm seeing a lot more data than you are. So think of a poker player. Someone who plays poker in person once a week with their friends sees a decent amount of hands, right? They get to play with a few different people, maybe a different person comes to the game. They might think they know what the average poker player is like. But if I'm a professional poker player and every day I play 8 tables simultaneously, different limits, different types of game, even sometimes limit here, hold them here. I play different tournaments as well as cash games, and I play millions of hands in a year as a result, because I'm playing them all, I'm playing them really quickly with a heads-up display, tons of different people. I'm going to have a way better sense of what the average poker player is like and what different levels of poker players are like and what patterns they have than that one person who has very limited life experience. So in this sense, I can tell you that lots of fans engage in extremely negative behaviour in terms of how you can communicate online with people. Now, you notice I didn't say behaviour in general. Like, they don't put people in concentration camps and kill them and torture them, fucking send napalm to people. Yeah, they're not doing any of that shit, are they? But in terms of what you can do within a tweet, they're pretty negative. Like, they'll actually tweet stuff directly. They'll reply to that person just super shitty, negative stuff that guy hasn't solicited. He doesn't want to talk to you in that sense. They just do it in this particular manner. You don't ever see me do that. The only people I ever will reply at like that or tag their name in a tweet when I'm saying something that seems negative or critical is actually people that I know personally and am friends with on some degree, or they shit talk me, I shit talk them. It's sort of like an unspoken agreement that we're going to do this, okay? I don't take players that don't know me, don't talk to me, don't solicit me, don't talk about it. I don't tag them up and go, oh, you know what, fuck King Win Fox, he is shit, should be removed, never play again. You'll never see that. Go and find those tweets. They don't exist. They're not there. As far as I know, you've never spoken about me. I don't know him personally. I don't know if he can take a joke like that. I would put without the at. Now, he's not obliged to follow me. He doesn't ever have to find that out. If someone doesn't tag it and tell him about it, again, there's no reason this ever has to happen. This is entirely reasonable. I can express my opinion in this way, but I've done everything I can do to be able to express my opinion, as I should be able to, without necessarily going out my way to fuck with that person or hurt his feelings or attack him in any sense. Fans don't have any qualms about doing that whatsoever. And by the way, in my position, I could easily do that if I wanted to. I could easily fuck with half of these people. Don't do it. I think it's actually unethical to some degree. It's not the way I want to live my life. I'm not a fan in that sense. I don't hate people. It's a fucking game. Likewise, despite the fact that I follow these players, these teams, I've predicted against these people many times. You know how many times I've seen those Dignitas guys play the NIP guys in CSGO, and I preferred some of those Dignitas guys at certain points in their career when NIP was falling off. But I knew at that era, NIP would have enough to get past them. They had the right map pool, they were good in the clutch, and it would happen. And I predicted NIP to win over them. Overwhelming amount of times. In general, I could define it like this. I don't have any faith in players or teams. I don't wish or hope for things to happen for these teams. I would like things to happen, but I don't hope or wish. It's not built into me. It's not some kind of like religious impulse in me that success has to be what happens here. I merely wish or acknowledge or would appreciate good play and entertaining matches and them to get the chance to play even. If they just get the chance to play for a right team with good circumstances, that's enough for me. I will be able to enjoy that. I also, this ties into a previous point about downplaying people, I acknowledge the greatness of every successful high-level player, successful and or high-level player in the history of League of Legends, or Counter-Strike Global Offensive, or Dota 2, or Brood War, or Quake Live. Everyone who was truly successful, wasn't just a one-off, who was really successful, had many top fours in their career, many finals, who played at a high level, even if they didn't have finals, etc. I can find a way to acknowledge and appreciate what they did, what it was about them and the way they played, and their accomplishments in the context of their careers. Even if they didn't play the style that I personally prefer or enjoy the most, or they beat the team that I enjoy or follow or watch, that doesn't matter. I'm able to get over that in that sense. Like, for example, I've always thought, and this is something else I'll have some content coming up about soon, I've always loved this beautiful relationship that happens with really elite level rivals, where even if you're a fan of one of them, or in my case you like them or follow one of them, by seeing that person lose to another one, whereas the fan, so the guy who's the LeBron Kobe or the Nadal Federer guy, whichever one he likes, he finds a way to downplay the other guy, like, oh, Nadal's just a brute and he has no skill and he's just a savage who just probably takes steroids and that's the only reason he wins with lame endurance and not even trying to hit winners. Instead, by watching the player I enjoy and the style I watch lose sometimes to that, or battle versus that, or be pushed to a high level, I actually grow to love the other person as well. In the sense of, like, I become someone who likes their play. I start to follow their play as well. I start to see the genius of it, because in the context of seeing what's happening of the player I like and the style I like, I realise the strengths of that. It teaches me about the game and about that player and what makes them brilliant. And so actually, as much as I like Federer, I don't like Nadal as much, but I think Nadal's a fucking amazing player. And I have so much appreciation and respect for his game because I've seen what it takes to win there and what he's had to do that. And the different skill sets and how they interact with the game and the successes you can have there and the different struggles he's been through. So he's been beating up on Federer all that time, but then Djokovic was just ripping through him for a whole year. So I've seen, it's made me appreciate that as well. Whereas, as I've told you, some of these fans, they don't do that. It always has to downplay that guy and shit on that guy. I also don't confuse personality, liking a person's demeanour, the sense of humour, the way they interact with people, even their looks, with their playing prowess. Now, aside from the fact fans do that anyway, as I described with teams and people not ever wanting you to cut someone, it means that if they like someone, they have to bullshit and tell you that their person's good. So I'll give you a good example. N-rated, beyond about the first quarter of 2013, has not been a top-level support player in the West. He hasn't been close to elite. And in the world, not even relevant as a support player. Yet he's one of my favourite personalities as a League of Legends player. Brilliant tactical mind, really interesting strategical thinker, very articulate, seems like a great team player in the sense that he knows what the team needs and how to play for the team, and very level-headed and can manage personalities. But as a player, no, pretty shitty support for a lot of that period of time. Doesn't necessarily mean he shouldn't ever be allowed to play for any teams. I mean, some of these teams should have been budget teams anyway that happened to be quite successful, in part because of strategical stuff he did. But I don't have to then take it and go, since I like all these things, I'll pretend that's not the case. He's really awesome. No, beyond that period, wasn't really that good. It was only strategically he could really impact the game as a positive sense. Fiflaren actually is how he's supposed to say it. So anyone who's seen me on desks with him knows that for the entire time I've known the guy, he's a great guy, really funny guy, chill guy to hang out with. Actually, he isn't just only a nice guy, he has a funny kind of slightly mean side to him that I get along with in private, but it doesn't mean I somehow pretend that he should have always been a nip and that there was never any issues with his playing nip. In the last sort of 5 to 6 months of his playing nip, he was one of the main reasons they were having problems, and his play definitely had fallen off a cliff and he wasn't effective in that team anymore. Now, he might have been able to play for a lesser team, but not in nip. It should have been done, and he probably should have been removed earlier. That doesn't have any interaction with what I think of him as a person and his mind for the game. What a great fucking colour commentator and analyst he is now. A great example going the other way of how I don't go the other way and confuse aspects I don't like about personality with the playing prowess, because those are the positives that I'm not confusing there. So negatives. So okay, simple. Anyone who's ever seen this, okay, when there was that whole Hellraisers thing where we were BMing each other back and forwards, me and Seized and Flamey and Adren, a bunch of them tweeted these pictures where they were all like flipping me the fiddle finger like fuck you. So Simple's one of the players who did that, okay. And then later, in a scenario I'm not going to describe, with someone else, he sort of indirectly sent me a private thing where he did the same thing again, just like was sticking the middle finger up like fuck you. Never spoken to the guy, doesn't seem like he likes me in any sense. Has no effect on what I think of him as a player. I think he's a fucking phenomenal player. I think he's one of the top 10 players in the world, definitely. Maybe even top 5 if he was actually in an active team that went to lands again. Has the potential to be one of the greatest players to ever play this game. Has no effect on me what he thinks of me personally or what his personality is like, which apparently is not very good in any sense, what he thinks of me or how his personality is interacting with other people in the community. There's a reason why a lot of people dislike that guy. To give you one more example, people wouldn't know this now because he's one of my buddies now, and I did that pod with him where we did 30 episodes in early CSGO. So Khan is someone I get along with very well now, but actually before that I didn't know him on a personal level. I didn't used to speak to him privately, and we and him used to just go back and forth, jabbing on Twitter. In fact, it was actually, if people know how I go with Happy now, where I fuck with them a bit, it was worse than that, because with Happy it's still playful. With me and Khan we used to go back and forth and attack each other and fuck with each other, but in a trash talk manner, okay. So it would seem like, oh, this guy's talking shit on me, making it like I'm not a good journalist, that I don't know what I'm doing, I'm biased and all that stuff. I've never said that Khan's like just an okay leader or he was only carried by Forrest or whatever. I've always acknowledged this guy's one of the greatest in-game leaders of all time. His ability to motivate and actually emotionally lead a team was brilliant, and to tailor his tactics to his personnel, absolutely phenomenal. He's one of the top 2 or 3 of all time in the Counter-Strike franchises. A brilliant guy, and that never was affected by the fact that I didn't really get on with his personality. I thought he came off pretty poorly, like he was kind of arrogant, etc. So in short, fans, they react emotionally rather than rationally and logically in many instances, partly because of this. They're too tied up in wish fulfillment, projecting the needs of their own ego, flaws in their own life, holes in their own life onto these players and these matches in this area of esports and sports in general. They tend to think that fan behavior is all positive. Essentially what they do is they take the positive of fan behavior, which is loving a team, really liking to watch this team, and they think that because that's good, that there's not a negative side. They think that that justifies even the negative side of being really negative to people, abusing people, being shitty to them, being hurtful to them, just being cunty to them. They think that that evens out, whereas it doesn't. This is good over here. Okay, that doesn't then mean you can do this bad thing here. That doesn't add up at all. So yeah, anyway, this is one of the reasons why you'll never in general hear me be like, I'm a fan of something, or definitely not fan in the sense that most people think of it. I like certain things, I appreciate certain things, I acknowledge certain things as very good. Thanks to Overdraft for the money, allowing me, much like Nip fans, to enjoy fantasy Counter-Strike Global Offensive or League of Legends if you're a Fnatic fan. And you can play at alphadraft.com, link in the description box below. They also produce 2 podcasts by the numbers, one for League of Legends, one for CSGO. League of Legends is with Monte Cristo, CSGO is with Richard Lewis. Thanks to Overdraft.